All right, the February 11th, 2025 work session of the Anne Arundel County Council is called to order. Do any of my colleagues have any questions before we begin? All right, we will begin with the discussion from the budget officer and Anne Arundel County Public Schools for a look into the potential federal grant impacts on the county. We welcome our budget officer, Chris Trumbauer, and Matt Stansky from AACPS to kick this off.
Great. Well, good morning, Madam Chair. For the record, Chris Trumbauer, Budget Officer. I think I'm going to do a little spiel, and then Mr. Stansky actually has a PowerPoint. So if you will.
He's showing you up today.
Well, we talked beforehand, and I thought he needed a little attention, so I decided not to do a PowerPoint. And honestly, I've just got done 8 town halls, budget town halls. I've had enough of PowerPoints for a while. Thank you all for coming to each of yours, though. That was a good success. So what I wanted to do, Madam Chair, is
Miss Robbie.
I just wanted to ask, will we be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint just before I take copious notes on it? It's in your folder. Thank you. Perfect.
So, Madam Chair, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the county budget perspective, and then I'd turn it over to Mr. Sansky, and he can talk about the school system, if that's
fine.
Good. So what I wanted to do, Council, is walk you through a little bit of the memo I sent on January 29th, and this was at the request of the chair, and simultaneously the county executive had asked for the same information, which is essentially with the incoming Trump administration and their posture towards federal funding, what is our exposure in our budget, okay? So spoiler alert, the numbers as they are, we've got in the most recently completed year, fiscal year 24, we had about $33.8 million of federal grants in our operating budget. And if you look on page 2 of my memo, there is a list of the different departments, and you'll see about 70% of these are in health and community development. So that's where the bulk of that operating funds are. And then you can go on down the list. There's grants for public safety, there's grants for public works, there's grants to the circuit court. So it's really systemic throughout the government. And to be clear, this represents all of the federal funding that we're getting in the operating budget. So I can't sit here today and give you a reasonable expectation of what funding will ultimately be threatened, because that is still being played out in real time. The Trump administration has been very clear that there are some things that they are philosophically opposed to, that they are going to aggressively seek to stop funding. Now, at the time of your request to us, the Office of Management and Budget had sent out a memo temporarily pausing all federal funding activity, presuming even to include funds that have already been obligated but not sent out the door. I'm not a lawyer, but to me that sounds a lot like impoundment, which is not legal, just as you are the ultimate fiscal authority for the county as the legislative branch. Congress is the ultimate fiscal authority for the federal government, and you can't just not pay something that's already been appropriated. So a few days after that memo was released, it was challenged in court, and ultimately it was rescinded. So the OMB memo no longer is valid. However, the executive orders that the president has signed, directing actions, are still in effect, and many of them are being challenged in court. So I don't know how this will ultimately play out. I can't expect that all of our federal grants are going to not happen again, but I do expect that some of them are. And I think over time, we will learn a little bit more about that. I certainly hope it will learn a little bit more before May 1st when we propose a budget. So we'll see. But the other thing I wanted to do is touch on the capital budget. So I sent you an updated list just this morning. Preliminarily, we had done a scan, and we had seen in our 6-year CIP, there's about $166 million of federal funding programmed in. We went back and took a closer look over the last week, and we get a number of grants through the state or other entities, but they're ultimately federal dollars that pass through those entities to us. So when we went back and we took a closer look and we tried to account for that, we came up with a new total of about $187.7 million. And so that's federal money programmed into our capital, our 6-year capital budget. You'll see the list of all of those grants. They're all throughout the county. They're in all of your districts. They're all over the place. By far, the largest one is the Fort Meade, the PS Military Installation Grant, which is an E-Class project, and Mr. Stansky will talk a little bit more about that. And then the final thing that I did want to mention, and again, it's referenced in the letter, there are a handful of federal grant revenues that we get directly as revenue. These are things like our E-rate reimbursement for the fiber that we provide. We get some revenue through our detention center. There's a little bit from the federal forfeited assets program, which is similar to our county fast fund. And then there's the social services support contract. So if you add those all up, that's about $10 million too. Again, I can't realistically tell you whether or not that's going to be threatened in the future. But what we wanted to do was to give the council and to give the county executive an understanding of the total federal exposure. So that's the entire universe, and then what ends up ultimately being affected due to a change in policy from the federal administration. We're learning more every day, just like everybody else is. So that's what I wanted to set up. I'm here to answer any questions. Maybe Mr. Stansky will do his thing first, and then we'll open it up, but it's up to you, Madam Chair.
I have a, for these grants, do you have a sense of how many are one-year grants and how many are ongoing rolling ones that say this is grant over 3-5 years or something?
So many of the operating grants are annual grants that we get every year, but they're granted every year. And prior to the grant legislation that we did last year, you all would get a resolution and you'd vote. You probably remember these coming in, and you vote for them all the time. So on the operating side, we don't really get multi-year grants that are guaranteed. On the capital side, because that can last longer, we get money appropriated, and then it may take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get that project done. So that I would consider that more of a multi-year grant. And again, there's a difference between money, you can get a grant award, you can get that funding appropriated, but then largely it's on a reimbursable basis. So the county, or in some cases the school system, lays out the cash to pay the contractors or to do the work, and then gets reimbursed from the federal government at some time later. And that's what was causing a lot of the initial alarm a couple weeks ago, is when that first OMB memo went out, that pause, it was capturing federal reimbursements for things that we've already done and hadn't gotten reimbursed for. That seems to have been peeled back. At least it's being legally challenged. But we'll see what the future holds.
Thank you. Good morning. Again, for the record, Matt Stansky, Chief Financial Officer for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Have a brief presentation. I'll reiterate some of the things Mr. Trumbauer alluded to, but I'm going to really talk about this in 4 funds. And so we'll start with our general fund. Mr. Trumbauer alluded to E-rate. So we are, this fiscal year have about $4.1 million in anticipated E-rate revenue. We're anticipating around $6 million in fiscal 26. And then the other revenue source federally we get in our general fund is impact aid. So this is due to having Fort Meade, the Fort Meade installation in the county. The federal government, specifically Department of Defense, has a program because the county can't tax that property and generate revenue for school systems. The federal government, gets us revenue to support those students in the Fort Meade area, and so we're looking at about $3.3 million. This is not reimbursable. This comes about 4 or 5 times a year. This is probably the only federal grant we get that is not on the reimbursable basis that Mr. Trumbauer alluded to. The vast majority of our federal fund comes in restricted grants. We are anticipating $53.8 million for fiscal &26. You see the majority of the grants here listed. The biggest ones are obviously our special education grants at $31 million and our Title I grant, which supports our schools with high concentrations of poverty, is at $17 million. All of these grants are on a reimbursable basis. We'll talk about that on the next slide. And in our recommended budget book, we have a link here and with details on each one of those grants. But almost all of these are paid on a reimbursable basis through the Maryland State Department of Education. We do have a couple grants that are direct. Our STEM DODEA grant that is direct between DODEA and AACPS, and then we do have a Department of Education mental health grant that is paid directly as well. But again, it's reimbursement based through the federal government. I also think it's important to note the difference in federal fiscal year and AACPS fiscal year. So our current federal grants are funded with fiscal '24 federal appropriations. So the October 1, 23 through September 30, 24 federal budget. And so for our fiscal '26 appropriations, that will be dictated on what ultimately happens with the fiscal '25 federal budget. Right now we have a continuing resolution through the middle of March. And so whatever happens between March and September will ultimately dictate what our fiscal '26 appropriation will be like. And then the federal fiscal '26 budget will determine our fiscal '27 appropriation. So I think it is important to note that the funding we're talking about in fiscal '25 has already been approved and grants have been awarded on that. But again, we are still trying to determine through Maryland State Department of Education and our other folks who follow the federal budget in education, you know, which grant year are we talking about when it comes to freezes of federal funds. On the capital budget side, Mr. Trumbauer alluded to, so we have a direct grant with DODEA for the renovation of Meade High School. That grant award was just shy of $114 million. Again, this is on a reimbursable basis, so it's again not even encumbered, right? We have to actually pay the vendor. And then once we pay the vendor, we can then seek reimbursement. To date, we have received just over $97 million for that project. We did just get a payment this week of $3.9 million, so they are still reimbursing for the moment, but this is one that we're monitoring closely. And then we just were awarded back in the summer a $1.2 million grant from EPA to purchase 6 electric buses. We're starting our pilot with the electric bus mandate that's here in Maryland, but again, we cannot seek reimbursement for those funds until the buses arrive and we have paid the vendor for the buses. This is one that we're very concerned about and monitoring very closely. There's been some news recently that they've put a pause on the EPA electric bus program, and so we have outlaid. We have at least the purchase order is out the door. So we're going to have a discussion about whether we proceed or not, because there is the mandate at the state level to begin converting to electric buses, and so we'll have to reconcile the two as we work through this. Another big federal program, is the council's well aware, is food services. So students who qualify for free and reduced price meals, we are anticipating around $27.6 million. This is again a reimbursement basis through MSDE, but ultimately funded through the Department of Agriculture. So there has not been as much discussion around this funding. There's a lot of unanswered questions, and so again, the district's going to continue to monitor this funding source as well, and we'll have to determine next steps once there's clear guidance. And then just from an impact standpoint, we have about 475 FTEs funded in fiscal '25 out of federal grants. We're looking at about just shy of 464 in fiscal '26. Again, the vast majority of them are funded out of Title I and special education. Most of these are teachers or teaching assistants that serve our students every day. And so again, we'll continue to monitor and make adjustments as necessary as we move forward. And that concludes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions the council will have.
First one to clarify, when you, that last slide where you said the number of FTEs that are funded, those are funded out of that, the previous total that you told us about 17 million for Title I, 31 million for
Correct.
special ed, those
Yep.
FTEs are funded out of those funds.
Correct.
Ms. Rodvian.
I think you just asked my same question. So they're the same. So it's not that,
That funding
Okay.
is used to support these positions.
okay. And then I think my next, which is horrible either way, but at least it's not that and that. I think my next question is for Mr. Trumbauer, and this is really just to look at, I'm sure we're looking at all the options, but I'm curious, what is the amount in our rainy day fund? And is that, I mean, this seems like rain.
So that's an excellent question, council member, and one that I've actually posed to the Office of Law because it's unclear to me based on the charter language whether a deficiency in federal funding would meet the trigger to allow us to use the rainy day fund. And the reason I say that is because the rainy day fund language is around the general fund not realizing the predicted revenue, and the federal grant money comes in the grant reserve fund. So I did pose that question to the Office of Law. They are looking at it. But I will say, even if the rainy day fund would be allowed to be utilized, that in essence is one-time funding, so it would help plug a gap for a year, but it would create then a structural problem where those ongoing programs are being paid for with a non-recurring source. And then it would also, those funds would come out of the rainy day fund and need to eventually be replenished if we maintain our policy to keep that at the maximum level. So we're looking into that, but hopefully shortly the Office of Law can give us a definitive answer.
This is a question for both of you. Have we seen, I'm very glad to hear that you just got a check for Meade High School this week, so some are moving forward, but have you already seen that some anticipated reimbursements or things have come in have not since the freeze was announced?
No,
Not at this time?
not at this time.
Mr. Stansky, do you know, one that I've heard about that's been impacting is the Head Start programs, which is not necessarily, that's separate from the school system, but have you heard of any funding problems with our Head Start
I
programs?
have not.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, so originally around the time of when I sent this memo to you all, we were getting word from, I think it was ACDS, that they couldn't access the HUD portal, or there was a couple things that was happening nationwide. My understanding is those have been resolved, but I can't tell you if there's any kind of expected reimbursements that we haven't yet received. I can follow up with Office of Finance to ask that.
Okay. Ms. Rodvian?
This is probably where you're at right now, but I'm curious, thoughts or plans of how to go forward, or I'm sure you're thinking about it, but I'm curious if there's, any big ideas for how to, deal with the situation going forward.
That's great. That's the question, isn't it?
Right.
So I can share that we still have a few months to put together the budget. And as I mentioned, right now, there's a great deal of uncertainty. And so I'm hoping one way or another that we get some resolution to some of that uncertainty before we have to start making budget decisions. To know which sources of federal funding are actually not going to be expected versus which one we can continue to count on. So that universe of what is ultimately going to be affected is going to matter. Are we going to have a $10 million hole, or are we going to have a $50 million hole? And keep in mind that regardless of what that is, we were already facing a reduction in expected state funding because of the actions that they're taking to reduce their structural deficit. So, a few months ago, before session gavelled in, we were feeling pretty good about the budget, right? Then the state came and we're like, okay, we're going to have to take a little hit there. And now the federal funding. So it's just kind of piling on. And then since you asked, I'll also share another concern of the budget office is potential effects to the revenue that we receive. And most notably, that would be income tax. So for instance, if we have a large federal workforce, I'm trying to figure out if someone can tell us the amount of county residents that are federal employees. We haven't gotten that yet. We have the number of federal jobs in Anne Arundel County, but not the number of residents that work for the feds. We're trying to get that. So if there is a significant change in the labor force, meaning positions are eliminated or departments are moved out of the area or something like that, that could obviously have a trickle-down effect on our income tax revenue, because if there's a significant number of people that are no longer earning income, or maybe they had to get a different low-paying job or something like that. Again, that is an uncertainty, that's an unknown at this point, but it is a vulnerability that's out there. So we haven't yet revised down our revenue projections, but that is another potential outcome.
Yeah.
As far, one last thought to actually answer your question, what are we going to do about it? It really comes down to a binary choice of if there is funding that is no longer being continued, will we try and continue the services that was paying for, or will we say we can no longer offer that because we don't have the funding? Because if the federal funding is gone, can we keep doing that project? Absolutely, but it will need to come from other dollars from something else. So we can't print money. We have to use the finite amount of resources we have. And although that choice and that decision is being considered, the administration isn't in a position to make that yet. It will be part of the budget process, which is playing out now.
Mr. Robin, I'll just add, to reiterate the state budget concern, Mr. Trumbauer alluded to the income tax hit on the county side. There's also potential, obviously, on the state side. Senator or President Ferguson was already on saying budget's going to go from bad to worse. As he alluded to, there's already cuts to K-12 education. There's proposed cost shifts of teacher retirement from state to local, cost shifts of non-public placement revenue from state to local. So we're already looking at a tough state budget predicament from the LEA perspective. There is concern that it may get worse by the time General Assembly concludes in early April. So again, we'll work with Mr. Trumbauer and the council on any changes, and hopefully May is still okay.
I just really wanted to follow up and say, I figured, the at the base of it, it's, either figure out a way to bring in more revenue or provide fewer services. I'm hoping that there's some other options out there. I don't know. That's probably magical thinking. But
we remain committed to being creative in how we tackle
and of course
budget
that's
issues.
Up to all of us too on the council. That's our responsibility too. I'm just curious. Your role is earlier than ours, so.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, Councilmember, so the budget process is playing out now. Right. It will for the next couple months, and we will see what options are.
Ms. Pickard.
Hi, thank you. This is extremely informative and a little scary. To add to the conversation, however, $187 million is not money that this Anne Arundel County just makes up in a couple months. So are we working with jurisdictions around the state, and whether it's, I know MACO is very engaged, I'm sure MABE is very engaged, but this could be devastating, certainly to our public schools. And it's not, I know Title I schools are spread out throughout the county, but special education is in every school. So this isn't, I don't see us being able to move forward without these federal funds, making that up in a county budget. I mean.
Yeah, Yes, if you're looking for my comment, council member, yeah, we don't have 187 million lying around. But again, what I'm trying to maintain a level of optimism that we've presented the whole universe to you. Mm-hmm. I don't see any way that the federal government can turn the spigot off for all of the funds that they send to state and local governments. There's too many things there that people can't live without. What I do think, and again, this is just my personal trying to figure out what might happen. I think there's going to be some targeted things that the federal administration no longer wants to support that we are getting funds for now. And those might be things like equity programs and some of the health and human services things and anything having to do with environmental projects or sustainability, right? I think those things are going to be threatened. What does that total universe look like? We just don't know yet. And again, a lot of this is going to play out in the court system because the federal administration is being very aggressive and they're being challenged, and ultimately how there are court rulings and how they choose to abide by those and what happens next is going to dictate, I think, the future. So although we've presented you a very dire situation, I am hopeful and somewhat optimistic that the true immediate impact will be somewhat significantly less than that. But I can't tell you that for sure. But going back to your original point, yes, if we lost all of the federal support, we would be in deep trouble from a fiscal standpoint.
Fun times, gentlemen.
It's something.
Well, thank you for being here. It's really important.
So, Mr. Stansky, yes, when I talked to you a week or so ago and requested this, that number of FTEs has gone up a lot since y'all were just beginning to look at it then. 292 positions in special ed. If we didn't get those fundings, I mean, that's a huge portion of our workforce. I know that the final Board of Education budget has not been approved to request, has not been sent to us, but the superintendent's budget includes requests for close to 200 more special education positions in it. But if we don't get the funding for this, funding is going to have to be found for those. Special education is not something that we can't provide. Right. That's not an area we can trim.
Right, and you're giving me an opportunity to reiterate this again, which is AACPS spends almost 40 to 50% more on special education services than we get in revenue from the federal and state governments. And so it's already a program that is underfunded. Mm-hmm. And so if the federal support were to be removed for that program, yes, there are the moment federal law that dictates that IEPs must be served. And so this would be funding, you're right, that we would have to look within our existing appropriations, cut other programs, general education programs, to continue to provide those services.
Correct. I mean, what we could be looking at, I just want to be, we don't know, but realistically, if the cuts had to be made, we're looking at, could be larger class sizes. Correct. For regular education, because we're going to have to reallocate dollars to special education or Title I. The same thing goes for the county. When I look at the list of federal grants, as Mr. Trumbauer said, 70% of our county federal grants go to health and community development, and a lot of those are crucial to serve our most vulnerable populations to have that. I mean, and there's a big chunk in there for our elderly, for instance, and things like that. And I think many of us view those services to be a vital part of county government that is a priority that we have to fund. So as Ms. Rodvian said, it's either going to be shifting things around within the budget or trying to find more revenue to make sure that those vital things are being covered. So I hope it won't turn out to be as dire as we say, but the uncertainty now is huge. I appreciate the hearing that both of you, that y'all are looking within the budgets as you craft them over the next months about what we may need to do to shift things around to make sure that crucial services are still covered. Are there any other comments or questions from my colleagues? Thank you both very much. Appreciate it. Next is Bill number 725. Administration, an ordinance concerning capital budget and program Forest Drive, Maryland 665 intersection. Mr. Hunt, and if you would introduce your colleagues as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt on behalf of the administration. With me, I have Chris Trumbauer, our budget officer, and Kelly Kenny, supervising county attorney from the Office of Law. So the administration is seeking, at the request of the budget office, to transfer $400,000 of funding in the FY25 capital improvement program from project H587400, which is the Forest Drive, Maryland 665 intersection improvements, to project 545900 R&B project plan, which is general county bonds. This transfer will fund a portion of the I-97 improvement project in order to prevent further delay from the state. DPW has advised the funds are not needed for the original project this year and can be transferred, and the administration will restore those funds to the project in the FY26 proposed budget. I have Mr. Trumbauer here if he wants to offer any additional details.
Thank you. For the record, Chris Trumbauer, budget officer. So this bill is kind of my fault because the Department of Transportation let the administration know that the I-97 project was going to be delayed from the state. So we had a conversation. We're like, well, that stinks. Is there anything we can do? And they said, without any funding, they're going to put it on pause because there's a lot of projects throughout the state that this is happening to because, as probably all know, the state fiscal situation required them, to make some cutbacks. And so through this conversation and a partnership with the State Department of Transportation, we discovered that if we could put a little bit of funding in here to keep the design process moving, then they would not delay the project any further. So we had a conversation with the county executive. This has been a project a long time in the works. And we decided, let's see if there's anything we can do to keep it on track. We had a conversation with DPW and we said, are there any projects that have funding this year in the H class that aren't going to need the funding by the end of the fiscal year that we could defer for a year? And they said, yes, the Forest Drive project is very important. We're going to do that, but we're not going to be able to spend it this year. If we had that money next year, it would work. So this is an old switcheroo. And what we're doing is temporarily reprogramming the money from that project into this new I-97 to keep that on track. And then in the FY26 budget, you will see that we will restore the money that is borrowed, if you will, from that project. So this is a way to keep the 97 project on track with no tangible impact to any existing projects and without adding any additional funds to the FY25 CIP.
Ms. Pickard.
So what is I didn't hear as much definitive. So if we put money towards this design to keep the project moving along, do we have some sort of commitment from the state to keep the project moving along, or?
So, yeah, that's my understanding, and I think I don't see Department of Transportation here, but I will have Mr. Sneed send a note to all of you to give you that the answer to that. But what you will see when the initial draft CIP, FY26 CIP, goes to Planning Advisory Board later this week, you will see an I-97 project based on the commitment from the state. So. But he can better answer the questions of the details of how that will all happen.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for my colleagues, but is that a phone call? Is that the meeting at Mako? Or is that like a letter, a MOU of understanding?
Yeah, I will ask Mr. Sneed to provide some more insight on that.
Mr. Volke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at the approved budget book, page 171, which is the R&B project plan. This is H545900. So in looking at this fund and the purpose of this is to me, sort of like a placeholder in terms of future projects. It describes itself as a revolving fund project that will be reimbursed when funds are appropriated for specific capital projects in the future. So I guess from a fundamental standpoint, what you're trying to do is move money from a defined project into a revolving fund and then use that money for a specific project in a budget year where there was no specific project because you don't have one to move it there. So I guess from a categorical standpoint or from a legality standpoint of what we're doing, is this even okay, how we're doing this?
It is okay in that we've got a bill before you to do it. I can tell you philosophically, so the Roads and Bridges Project Plan, R&B Project Plan, that's where we put money for kind of initial work on projects that will become real in a future, right? At the time we put together the FY25 CIP, we did not know that the 97 project was in jeopardy. We hadn't been told any of that. There is funding in that, as you alluded to. There's a list of projects. It's probably in the appendix that's going to support. There was not capacity to do this one. So, essentially we had two choices. If the administration wanted to do this action to keep this project on track, we could either add money to the CIP, we could use unappropriated fund balance or something like that, which would increase the total amount, or we could do a transfer from one project to another. As I described, we did a survey. We found out that other H-class project could, would not spend its full appropriation this year, would need it next year. So we decided to move those funds. But, philosophically, this is where the funding probably would have been if the current situation was known to us back when we put the FY25. So we put an amount of money in Roads and Bridges Project Plan to take care of whatever is on DPW's list. This wasn't at the list at the time. It came to our attention, so that's why we're choosing this avenue to do it that way.
Thank you. Appreciate that. How many votes does this take to pass on the council? Is this a 4 or is this a 5 vote total to pass? It's probably an Office of Law question.
I would assume it's 4, but
we have discussed this, not all of us, but we have gotten guidance that it potentially could be a 5-person vote. So that's why we're asking the question.
well, it could also be unanimous. I'm just saying.
Kelly Kenny,
Love your
Supervising County Attorney. The bill actually says that it requires an affirmative vote of 5 members of the council.
Oh, it does. Oh, look
It
at
does. That's the only way I knew.
Good thing you're here. I didn't know that. We would appreciate your vote, though, Mr. Volke. A lot of District 3 residents probably have to travel that corridor to and from various things.
Always plugging.
Ms. Pickard?
So thank you, Madam Chair. This matching funds from the county to keep, this really isn't matching funds then. This is just design funds to keep the project moving forward. Where's the ultimate, are these federal funds that could be snatched from the state, or how is the final project going to be funded?
So my understanding is this is similar, and again, for the actual council meeting, we'll be sure to have Mr. Sneed here or someone from DPW, but this is state funding, so similar to the Route 2, Route 3, Route 214 state highway projects. So there will be a large state contribution, to the ultimate construction, but they are, again, my understanding is that State Department of Transportation was systemically delaying a number of projects that hadn't gotten to a certain stage, and that stage was, 30% design or something. Again, we're out of my expertise here. So we made a decision to get that project up to that point where it would no longer be delayed by Department of Transportation.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to reiterate from Ms. Pickard's earlier questions that I really want to see what assurance we have from the state that if we put this money in, it's actually going to move forward, and more than just a phone call, that something, that we're not throwing money into a hole that's going to be pulled away from us, given the current fiscal state of the state, that the uncertainty of how this could move forward.
Absolutely, and we will have that provided before the public hearing.
Are there any other, Ms. Broadbent?
I think this is just a comment that, and I've mentioned this to you, Mr. Trumbauer, I'm concerned about the long-term success of this project, that adding a lane to 97 might be beneficial for several years, but that it would actually not necessarily provide any long-term benefit. So I'm curious if my colleagues have any thoughts about that. I'd be curious to hear more of your thoughts about this. I know this project is pretty far down the road, but this is, to me, one of those, if you build it, they will come kind of things. And, are we just going to end up with the same issues on I-97 that we already have, but now in 3 lanes with a lot of money spent and a significant amount of environmental damage?
Councilmember, I provided to you the response from Mr. Sneed that addressed those, which I think I'm happy to share with the entire council. And again, we'll make sure he's here to, to answer questions at the public hearing.
Yes, please, we'll share that with the whole council. Mr. Volke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just going back to kind of my line of questioning from before, I think I'll try to put a finer point on it. So understanding that there is the requirement of 5 members to avail ourselves of sections 712 and 716 of the charter, how do we see this as fitting into those sections of the charter? So specifically, I think that normally the capital budget can only be increased from revenues received from anticipated sources but in excess of budget estimates. That doesn't seem to be the case. Or from revenues received from sources not anticipated in the budget for the current fiscal year. That doesn't seem to be the case either. So is there some sort of precedent that we can point to where we have done this as a county, that we've moved money from a dedicated source already into a sort of revolving fund like this, availing ourselves of these sections in the charter?
So in terms of examples of funding transfer from one CIP project to another, yes, there's examples. We can provide a list. To your specific questions about those sections and provisions, that's well beyond my expertise, and see if Kelly wants to take a stab. Yeah, well, she can certainly defer.
Yeah, Kelly Henny, Supervising County Attorney. I would have to look at these charter sections and get back to you. It's just not something that I look at every day, so I can get back to you on that, and I can provide that to the whole council.
All right, are there any other comments or questions about Bill number 725? All right, we will move on to Bill number 825. Board of Education Supplementary Appropriation Transfer of Funds. Welcome back, Mr. Stansky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table is Matt Stansky, CFO for Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and Kelly Kenny, Supervising County Attorney from the Office of Law. This bill is submitted at the request of the Anne Arundel County Board of Education, which amends their FY 2025 expense budget by making a second quarter operating transfer and supplemental appropriation in the amount of $18,421,900 as a result of additional revenue from various federal and state grants, and transfers some funds between categories. No additional county funding is involved in the bill. This supplemental appropriation and fund transfer request was approved by the Board of Ed at its December 18th, 2024 meeting. There is a detail in the fiscal note of where the various funds are being transferred to, and I'm sure Mr. Stansky wants to add anything additional.
Yeah, again, for the record, Matt Stansky, Chief Financial Officer, Anne Arundel County Public Schools. This is our annual second quarter transfer we bring, really recognizing additional grant revenue, mostly in the federal side. 2 main real processes here. First is many of our grants, including ESSER, are multi-year. And so this is really shifting appropriation from that was unspent in 24 into 25 to close those grants out, and then making any adjustments in grant awards that we received based on our estimates back in last December, either up or down. And happy to answer any questions council may have.
I have a question. This goes back to our previous discussion. I forgot to ask it then. are a large number of these grants that we receive, are they, I asked it of the county, but I didn't ask of you, are they multi-year grants?
So most of our grants are annual, but per federal law, you have 27 months to expend. So they can go across 3 fiscal years, but we get new grant awards annually.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Next is Bill number 925, the General Development Plan, Region 1. And we welcome all of our Office of Planning and Zoning folks. Hit it, Mr. Hunt.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table, I have Christina Pump, our Deputy Planning and Zoning Officer, Mark Wildonger, our Senior Planner, and Cindy Carrier, our Planning Administrator. We're here to discuss Bill 925 and 1025, which is for the comprehensive rezoning and adoption of the region plan for Region 1, which covers North County communities of Linthicum Heights, Brooklyn Park, Curtis Bay, Ferndale, as well as parts of Hanover and Severn. I will turn it over to Ms. Pompa if she wants to make any. Okay. So I've been informed that they also have Region 3 incorporated into the presentation as well, which we will discuss all at once. So Region 3 covers the communities of Glen Burnie, Severn, and a portion of Millersville.
Oh, my mic is already on. Hello. Madam Chair, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to be here to talk to you about Regions 1 and 3. We were here a month ago to talk to you about Region 9. Just before I turn it over to staff, I'd just like to go through a list of thank yous. Number one, to the administration for their support and involvement in the region plan process. It is obviously a big process, and they have been very supportive of us. Want to recognize that my boss, Jenny Dempsey, is in the audience. Thank you for her support. We have long-range planning staff here today that have worked on these plans, but don't forget there are a whole ton of people in the office that also support this work, especially in our GIS and research group, who do a lot of behind-the-scenes mapping and analytics, and then produce all of the mapping products that we use for public-facing outreach. We'd like to thank our partner agencies. They're listed on the inside of the region plans. I'd especially like to call out the Office of Law. Once we start to get near the council processes for the plans and comprehensive zoning, they become very strong partner, and we do a lot of work together. As you know, each of the region plans has a stakeholder advisory committee. They meet over the course of about 10 months. They bring a lot of expertise from their communities and are very invaluable to the process. Also want to thank the members of the Planning Advisory Board for their work, and then in general, all the stakeholders that have been involved and council members. For Regions 1 and 3, this hits council districts 1 through 6. Ms. Ledbetter is busy already with Region 9. 3 big differences between the Round 2 region plans and the Round 1 region plans are, one, we had some contractors in our budget that helped us with outreach, which helped us expand our mailing lists and reach more people. We had a slightly different planning advisory board schedule that was more extended, and since they're volunteers and we handed them a lot of work, I think that that worked better for us as well as the public. And then the other big thing that we mentioned during Region 9 is because at the beginning of the Round 2 process, we only sent postcards to the to all property owners in the regions, we decided to send a bulk mailing right before the Planning Advisory Board. So for these 3 regions, 1, 3, and 9, there were 2 mailings that went to all property owners, but the second one, right before the Planning Advisory Board, went out bulk mail. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark Wildonger, who's going to talk about Region 1, and then Desiree Williams is going to talk about Region 3. This might be your debut at the County Council. Patrick Hughes is on well-deserved leave, and then we have Cindy Carrier at the end of the table and Kelly Kenny. We're happy to answer any questions when we're
Okay, good morning. We're excited to be at this briefing to discuss the Region 1 and 3 plan and the draft comprehensive zoning maps. Again, my name is Mark Wildonger. I'm a planner with the Region 1 team. So here's an overview of what we'll cover this morning. I'll start with a general region plan information that is common to all 3 region plans that are part of this round. You've already heard from the Region 9 team a month ago, but this may be new to residents interested in the Region 1 and 3 plans. We'll review how the plans relate to Plan 2040, the outreach and input during the process, the general structure of these plans, the relation between plan land use and zoning. Then we'll move to overviews of the plans and zoning within Regions 1 and 3. And lastly, we'll provide a link to the Region 9 presentation and recording where our colleagues from Region 9 provided a tutorial on how to use the online web viewer to see zoning. We prefer to take questions at the end, but of course, if something comes up, we'd be happy to entertain it. So Plan 2040, if you remember, adopted 3.5 years ago. It is the latest version of the county's general development plan. OPZ worked with other county and state agencies to develop Plan 2040 with assistance from a 23-member citizen advisory committee. The plan is a countywide plan and looks out over a 20-year time horizon to set a vision for where we want to be as a community and outline the strategies that will move us in that direction. It is centered on land use and sets the policy framework to protect the natural environment, shape development of the built environment, provide public services to promote healthy communities, and support a diverse, resilient economy. It was developed through dozens of public forums and is informed by thousands of comments from the community. There are many concerns throughout the community, including traffic congestion, school capacity, environmental protection, and housing affordability. Plan 2040 includes goals, policies, and strategies to address these issues and manage development and redevelopment. We are also proud to share that Plan 2040 won the 2021 Maryland Sustainability Growth Award for the Sustainable Communities category. Plan 2040 set up a process for smaller regional plans to be carried out to better understand and address the issues at the community level. Plan 2040 split the county up into 9 regions. The first round of region planning focused on Regions 2, 4, and 7, and all of those plans and zoning maps have recently been adopted. The second round of region planning focused on Regions 1, 3, and 9, and again, Region 1 including the communities of Brooklyn Park, Linthicum Heights, Curtis Bay, Ferndale, BWI Airport, Harmons, and parts of Hanover. Region 3 includes the communities of Glen Burnie, Severn, and parts of Millersville. Region plans follow Plan 2040, but are intended to drill down and make recommendations about how to implement the goals of Plan 2040 at the region level. Like Plan 2040, the region plans are policy guides and are not regulatory. The region plans are to be implemented with a range of tools, including the zoning map, zoning and development codes, capital improvement program, and program, policy, and study initiatives. The region plan process also includes comprehensive zoning. Plan 2040 also established that a stakeholder advisory committee between 9 and 15 members would work to collaborate with and advise staff in the development of the plan and its recommendations. Each committee is to be composed of a diverse range of viewpoints and demographics in the region. For example, longtime and recent residents, members of community or social organizations, local business representatives, young adult representatives, members of school organizations, home builders, or real estate developers, or say, for example, members of government agencies. Members of each stakeholder advisory committee were either nominated by the county executive or a county council member, and the appointment of each SAC was approved by resolution adopted by the county council. Their work started with a kickoff meeting in October of 2023, and they met an additional 9 and 10 times respectively for Regions 1 and 3 between then and August 2024. Quorum was met and verified at each meeting. Given the work that these folks have put into the process, I do want to extend a special thank you to the SAC members for their tireless work on these plans. The intimate knowledge of their geographic areas and the time they devoted was significant and must be commended. I wanted to also emphasize the outreach efforts of the Office of Planning and Zoning during this entire planning process and highlight several key outreach efforts. A complete list of outreach activities can be found on the Region 1 and 3 hub sites, and there's also a section within the plans that details these outreach events and public opportunity to comment. For example, there was the Office of Planning and Zoning attended and shared information at local fairs and events. There was an initial announcement sent via postcard to all property owners. There were 5 questionnaires and 3 in-person local office hour events. There were 2 community forums. There was a draft zoning map available for public comment, plus 2 in-person local office hour events. And during that process, a letter was also sent to property owners affected by any potential recommended change at that time. I mentioned the SAC meetings. Those were also open to the public to attend and comment. Letters were also sent to property owners announcing the Planning Advisory Board phase of the process and property owners where zoning was recommended to be changed. Ads were also taken out in the Capitol Gazette during that Planning Advisory Board process. And lastly, lawn signs were actually put up at key intersections to let people know that this process was happening and where to go for more information. So it was a good variety of online opportunities, in-person opportunities. We were out in the community to let people know we were starting this process and where to get some more information. Moving on to the structure of the region plan, one will note that this structure is very similar to that of Plan 2040. There is a vision statement, which is the starting point that provides a common direction for long-term planning. It is informed by the community and tailored for each region. There is background information, including detailed description of each community within the region. And there are 4 primary chapters dealing with key elements of the region plan. First is the natural environment, which covers sensitive areas, water quality, forest, land conservation, water and sewer issues. Second is the built environment, which addresses housing, planned land use, climate change, sea level rise, transportation, and cultural resources. Third is the healthy community section, which discusses parks, health, aging and disabilities, public schools, and other public facilities. Fourth is the healthy economy, which covers redevelopment and business assistance. There is also an implementation section, which I'll cover in the next slide. And lastly, appendices include tables of the development policy areas and planned land use where changes are recommended. The implementation section of the plan includes the recommendations to address the issues discussed in the plan. The matrix shows that these recommendations are specific to the region, how it is anticipated to be implemented, the implementing department, performance measures for accountability, and an anticipated timeline for implementation. Recommendations are generally meant to drill down to the specific issues of the region and not repeat the strategies of the general development plan. Within the plan are the development policy area map and planned land use map. The appendix includes tables and maps that note changes in the development policy area map and the planned land use map from Plan 2040. I've been throwing around some terms like development policy area and planned land use that I'm guessing folks don't use on an everyday basis. So I want to take a moment to explain and provide examples of these terms. This table shows how they relate to each other. So for example, the development policy areas broadly identify where development and redevelopment are encouraged and preservation of a particular character or natural features is prioritized. Planned land use further guides development patterns based on the vision for the region. Development policy areas and planned land use set a policy framework that is implemented through zoning, which is regulatory. Zoning is then used to help implement the policies outlined in the development policy area map and the planned land use map. Zoning provides regulatory details such as type and intensity of uses and whether they are permitted or not permitted in certain areas. And a reminder that region plans like Plan 2040 are policy documents, but comprehensive zoning is regulatory. Just want to keep stressing that. During comprehensive zoning, Office Planning and Zoning makes recommendations to align the region's zoning with the planned land use map as required by state code. The region plan also recommends some updates to the planned land use map as adopted with Plan 2040. Table 17 in Volume 2 of Plan 2040 outlines the relation between planned land use and zoning categories. I have a screenshot of part of that table in a couple slides here. So in our comprehensive zoning analysis for the region plans, we start with the development policy areas and the planned land use and end up with a zoning recommendation. But there are times where we have a zoning recommendation, then that necessitates an update to the planned land use or development policy areas. So it sort of goes back and forth and is in an iterative process, working with community members and other stakeholders and departments. So I'll quickly review some of the different types of changes then recommended. The consistency change recommendations are provided based on the approved planned land use from Plan 2040. Here is part of that Table 17 from Volume 2 of Plan 2040, which provides a crosswalk of how anticipated uses correlate to the planned land use and zoning. The examples on the right-hand side show the Harris Heights Avenue area in Region 1. In this example, the planned land use, residential low to medium density, was adopted in Plan 2040 to align with the built condition of the development, which is not anticipated to change over a 20-year time horizon. But the area is currently zoned R15, which is not consistent with the planned land use. So the proposed zoning R5 aligns with the planned land use to match what has actually been built. This protects the physical character of that area and better predicts infrastructure needs. Aligning zoning and parcel boundaries. This type of change aligns, again, just what it says here is zoning to the parcel boundaries. Bill 2223, adopted by council, allows the Office of Planning and Zoning to correct minor misalignments between the parcel and zoning layers. For the Round 2 region planning effort, the Office of Planning and Zoning GIS staff performed a comprehensive review of misalignments and made corrections. The scope of this effort was conservative, so there are still parcel and zoning misalignments that are being corrected through the region planning process and will be included for council review and adoption. We are intentionally applying a single zoning category to each parcel unless there is a documented reason to split zone a parcel. This will provide integrity to the zoning map and diminish the likelihood of the boundary being arbitrary. The next type of change is a refinement to the open space or OS zone to align with public parks or natural areas and areas covered by conservation easements in perpetuity. This process aligns with the goals and policies in Plan 2040. The OS district was initially created with the 1970s comprehensive rezoning of the original 1952 zoning map. The OS zone appears to be generally based in part on older FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Area, 100-year floodplain boundaries, but in our research, there is no documentation for much of the OS boundary and the justification is unclear. The FEMA floodplain maps have been updated over time and now deviate from the OS zoning district. County code as well as state and federal laws and regulations have been adopted that include more stringent protections of floodplains, streams, and wetlands as properties developed. OPZ, Office Planning and Zoning, we believe these other regulations are more effective and appropriate tools than the zoning map for managing risks of development in floodplains and conserving the natural functions of streams and wetlands. However, even though the original policies in Plan 2040 regarding conservation in parks and open space planned land use continue to be the Office of Planning and Zoning's preference for the reasons mentioned, there are stakeholders that do not trust the code will protect the natural environment. Given this input for consistency changes, the Office of Planning and Zoning retained the OS zone where it was greater than 20% of a property and was encumbered by natural features based on county and state guidance maps. It is the Office of Planning and Zoning's recommendation that the code be updated to minimize modifications to natural features and that a future planning effort reconcile these OS zoned areas to align with property boundaries as originally intended in Plan 2040. For Region 1 and 3, this resulted in eliminating 114 and 167 consistency changes. All property owners where the proposed zoning changed from the Planning Advisory Board map to the County Council map received a letter from the Office of Planning and Zoning informing them of this recommended change. Letters were mailed last week. If a property owner does not agree with the recommended zoning on their property, they can apply to the council for an amendment to the Region 1 and 3 comprehensive zoning bills. Most of the planned unit developments in the county contain zoning lines that do not correspond with land use density. Many of them run through the middle of subdivisions. The Office of Planning and Zoning is not recommending any changes to the zoning in these communities because of the unique agreements executed for each planned unit development. Lastly, the Office of Planning and Zoning made recommendations and reviewed owner applications, draft zoning maps, and public input with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee during the May 2024 and August 2024 meetings, at which point recommendations were further refined. Okay, so that was a general methodology of the work that has been done amongst these region plans generally for round 2. The rest of the presentation will provide a brief overview of what is being recommended for Region 1 and Region 3. So starting with what the community is saying about Region 1, we had heard that development pressure has an adverse impact on the environment. There's a lack of affordable housing and diverse housing options within Region 1. Traffic congestion is a primary issue to the region, and much of the workforce travels from outside of the area to reach job centers. There's also additional need for park and recreational facilities, and there is also a lack of quality and essential commercial options. The vision statement here covers a lot of key elements of themes similar to what we heard in the previous slide with the vision statement. But key points here of the Region 1 vision statement include equitable opportunities for all, maintaining the character of existing neighborhoods, protecting the environment, and growing sustainably. So again, as noted before, we'll jump into some of the highlights of each of the 4 chapters for the topical areas within the region plan. The strategies here look to address the issues or what we had heard then during our outreach or opportunities for public feedback. So some highlights here with the natural environment include addressing stormwater management issues, planting trees in underserved communities, and remediating former industrial sites, which there are a few in Region 1. For the built environment, some recommendations include additional housing for seniors so that folks can age in place because they do enjoy living within the Region 1 area, and for transportation recommendations, addressing traffic patterns, especially during rush hour. Some schools in the area only have one ingress and egress, which make it difficult onto local roads. Diverting truck traffic, again, given some of the heavy industrial areas within Region 1, some of these trucks are utilizing Waze, Google Maps to get around more easily, which means that they're going through residential areas where maybe the infrastructure may not be able to handle that. Developing plans to address traffic and pedestrian needs, and developing more transit routes to serve the folks within Region 1. Recommendations for healthy communities, including addressing the deficit of public parks within Region 1 and creating more water access and car-top boat launches. Within community facilities, there was, we certainly heard from a lot of folks that there is a need to increase safety at the Cromwell and Linthicum light rail stations. And again, just to highlight a few of the recommendations or strategies within the Region 1 plan here. Lastly, for healthy economy, identify new programs and incentives to attract science and technology-based employers, support financial incentives to hopefully revitalize some of the blighted areas within Region 1, and again, rehabilitate shopping centers at some of the light rail stations. Before we head into comprehensive zoning for Region 1, we want to briefly mention the holding capacity. The Office of Planning and Zoning has conducted this analysis at the county level and region level. Despite the data showing that the adopted zoning in Region 1 cannot accommodate the projected growth, the recommended zoning map does try to address this deficit. It should be also noted that these region boundaries are porous and that there may be neighboring regions that have a surplus of potential. These areas are mainly designated targeted growth areas, like the town centers on the development policy area map. This holding capacity is also based on existing zoning and does not take into account any changes that may result from the Housing Attainability Act, which becomes effective later this year. So here are the change statistics recommended for recommended zoning in Region 1. If a particular zoning category is not listed, it is not currently recommended, or there is no currently adopted zoning for that area within Region 1. So for example, there are many more maritime districts, but again, those aren't necessarily found in Region 1. So to summarize some of these larger swings, for example, looking at the R5 zoning district, many of these changes were due to consistency changes, like parks that were had an adopted zoning of R5 becoming open space. There are changes to the industrial zones as a result of upzonings and a recommended rezoning in Curtis Bay to mixed use. The increases to mixed use zones, like I said, mainly due to one property in the Curtis Bay area, but also recommended changes at or in close proximity to rail stations. So now I'll just provide a general overview of some of the zoning within the communities within Region 1. So we received 8 zoning applications within the Brooklyn Park community, and there were 8 office planning and zoning and SAC recommended zoning changes. And there were 3 areas where the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, Planning Advisory Board, and the Office of Planning and Zoning had different recommendations. Some of these differences may have occurred because the Stakeholder Advisory Committee may have completed their work and they may not have had an opportunity to weigh in on some of these recommendations, or the Office of Planning and Zoning may have received additional information after the Planning Advisory Board, and so we may have made different recommendations after that time. In the Curtis Bay area, there was 1 change application, 5 Office Planning and Zoning and SAC recommended zoning changes, and 2 areas where there were differing opinions. Ferndale, 5 zoning change applications, 7 areas or 7 Office Planning and Zoning and SAC recommended zoning changes, and 2 areas where there were differing recommendations. Hanover had a significant amount more change recommendations. This, as you can see, most of that purple area, purple is signified by our industrial areas. This is where we saw some of that fluctuation between the W1, 2, and 3 zoning districts, mainly W1 and 2 in this area. There were 4 additional Office Planning and Zoning and SAC recommended changes, and 1 area where there were, again, differing opinions. Harmon's one of our smaller communities within Region 1. There weren't any zoning applications received, but 3 recommended zoning changes. And again, given the small area and the general character of this neighborhood, there were no differing opinions between the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, the Planning Advisory Board, and the Office of Planning and Zoning. With Linthicum Heights, there were 11 zoning changes, or zoning applications rather, 7 additional Office Planning and Zoning and Stakeholder Advisory Committee recommended changes, and 5 areas where the different committees and the Office Planning and Zoning had differing opinions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Williams to discuss the Region 3 plan.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Desiree Williams. Again, I'm the planner in the Region 3 planning team. So I will jump right into the public outreach process for Region 3, some of the themes we heard. So during all the outreach we conducted, there were several themes that emerged among Region 3 residents. Many felt there is limited access to parks and recreational facilities in the region, and were concerned also about protecting the remaining natural and wooded areas in the region. We also heard about the lack of housing diversity and affordability, while also expressing concern simultaneously about the desire to maintain the general scale and character of existing communities. Other concerns that we often heard were regarding traffic congestion, particularly around along Reese Road, Telegraph Road, in the community of Queenstown, and along Quarterfield Road, to name a few. Residents also wish there were more small businesses to shop and dine, and particularly in the Glen Burnie Town Center area. And generally, they're just feeling like there's a lack of investment in the region, both on the private and public side. So for the Region 3 vision, it covers a lot of the key elements I covered in the previous slide. The vision statement was ultimately developed or approved by the SAC and PAB and developed by the SAC. The themes focus on balancing the social, economic, and environmental needs of the residents, providing housing and transportation options for all, and providing opportunities for the community to recreate and engage. So just to briefly cover each chapter and some of the strategies and recommendations we made for each chapter, the natural environment chapter focused heavily on implementing stormwater management improvements and encouraging redevelopment, since our modern code requirements are much stronger in this area now. We also include strategies on encouraging and supporting land conservation efforts, particularly in the Green Infrastructure Network, and supporting living shoreline efforts in the Marley Neck area. The Built Environment chapter focuses on improving housing affordability and housing diversity, encouraging redevelopment, minimizing impacts of the airport on existing communities, and improving traffic congestion and bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and accessibility. The Healthy Communities chapter highlights the need for more community amenities such as parks, gardens, and trails, improving safety and accessibility to the existing amenities such as the B&A Trail, and then also improving, we heard a lot about people wanting more access to the Severn Run natural area, so working with the state on that to see if there's something we can do to provide more access. The Healthy Economy chapter provides strategies for encouraging redevelopment of some of the older underutilized properties in the region, particularly in the Glen Burnie Town Center. So before we head into the comprehensive zoning for Region 3, I also wanted to briefly mention show the holding capacity analysis. Similar to Region 1, the data shows that Region 3 cannot currently accommodate the projected growth. Looking at the existing zoning, as Mark mentioned, similar to Region 1, the recommended zoning map for Region 3 does try to address this deficit, but it should also be noted that these region plan boundaries are porous, and really it's more of a county-wide scale issue for the holding capacity, whereas some regions can accommodate more growth than others. And we focus on our areas of growth in the targeted growth areas like the town centers. So for our change statistics for Region 3, as you can see, the largest increase is to the OS zone. This is a result of the recommended changes, particularly within the RLD and R1 zoning category, which have the greatest decrease. We've also have an increase in the mixed use zoning in the region. So we went from 0 acres to 174 acres. Most of that was previously zoned W1 and R5. It's really two big areas that we changed to mixed use. So just to cover the applications we received and the other zoning changes in each of the communities. For Severn, we had 18 zoning change applications, 12 that were initially received, and then 6 that we received later during the preliminary draft and PAB draft phases. 2 where the SAC did not reach consensus, and then 4 where the PAB or the SAC had a different recommendation than OPZ. For Glen Burnie, we had 35 zoning change applications, 23 that were initially received and 12 that were received during the preliminary draft or PAB draft. So 2 where the SAC did not reach consensus, and then 26 OPZ and SAC recommended zoning changes, 3 where the PAB had a different recommendation than OPZ, and 5 where the SAC had a different recommendation, 3 of which were the ones along Furnace Branch Road. For Millersville, we had 8 zoning change applications, 7 initial, and then 1 received during PAB draft. The SAC reached consensus on all 7 they reviewed. There were 2 OPZ and staff recommended changes, 5 areas where PAB had different recommendations than OPZ, 4 of which were along the Elverton Road area. All of the communities. I just also wanted to mention, for the sake of time, we're not going to go through the tutorial again of the web viewer, but there is a link here that will take you to the previous council meeting with Region 9, where Jesse walked through a whole tutorial of how to use the web viewer for those that are interested. We'll also be posting these slides on our hub sites for anyone in the public who wants to access that and doesn't want to write down the whole link to access that. So I think that covers my presentation, or our presentation, so we can take any questions.
Ms. Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all very, very much for all your hard work, and thank you to several of you who took the opportunity to meet with District 2, the team, Kristen and I, to talk about some specific issues. We have worked together to draft some amendment language, so I just thought I would take an opportunity to talk a little bit about it here, if that's okay, really to the not comprehensive zoning changes, but actual strategies. So my colleagues will be seeing these amendments next week. No, March. But specifically going in the healthy community section, we identified properties that could greatly enhance they abut parks or trailhead, and so I would like to amend the language in the Region Plan 3 to study specific areas for potential trailhead and or park enhancements to improve overall visitor experience and increase access to recreation space and green areas in the region. And there are several, we'll go over it more specifically, and then another healthy community amendment, study zoning categories of privately owned community park space to determine if a new category of zoning is necessary for space intended to remain open park space, but needs greater flexibility for future projects beyond what is allowed in the open space zoning category. So that's just a interesting, we have certainly in Glen Burnie, where we're trying to retain green space, and where some of our we have a community association that owns green park property, and it was split zoned, I believe, or is split zoned, and the recommendation is to take it to R5, not because anybody wants to see it developed residentially, but because within our code, they would have more flexibility under that R5 designation if they wanted to add any recreational amenities than they do in open space. And that seems sort of counterintuitive, even though they've agreed to that. It seems like we should have something beyond open space and recreational zoning to talk about parks with amenities on them. Either we need to talk about what we do, we need a park designation, or something. So that's one of those, because I think, I know the Glen Burnie community it's been analyzed that we have the least amount of tree canopy in the county, and so we really want to make sure we retain that. Not to say that the community association would ever be looking to sell that park, but if they did, it is zoned R5. So it will be zoned R5 based on this plan in its totality. So that's a little concerning to me. So we're looking at some strategies that the county and council need to maybe think about in the next 10 years as we look to preserve green space and tree canopy. And the other one I mentioned was, as we looked around, there are sort of remnant parcels properties that are privately held, but they're abutting parks that the county owns. They're tricky in what to do with, how to develop them, how to zone them so that they transition between park space and maybe the commercial space that they're, or even residential space. So maybe the county should do a comprehensive review and look to land acquisition to complete a park with some of those opportunities. So those amendments are coming from Region 3. I'm sure there'll be a few more based on comp zoning and some other things, but I just thought I would take the opportunity to talk about those. I don't know if y'all have any. We work together on those, so I think everybody's in agreement that we're comfortable with that language, and I would hope my colleagues would agree with, or if you have any questions about it, I'm happy to talk about it now. That was a lot, sorry. I'm caffeinated. Did y'all want to? I really appreciate y'all working with us to get the language right. We're good? Thank you. I do have some, if I could continue, Madam Chair. When we look at the holding capacity in each of our regions, I know we're looking at town centers to increase residential development, but when I look at the holding capacity, the town center has the least amount of acres on it. So, and the town center is developed. So I'm just curious, these are more philosophical policy questions, but how we think we're going to achieve attainability and affordability with inside of our zoning districts for residential. Every region plan talks about housing affordability, housing attainability, and diversity of dwelling type. I'm not necessarily, we're not really talking about in these region plans how those policy goals match up with land use plans and zoning districts. I think there's a bit of a disconnect, and that's where some of our legislative work comes into play, but there's a lot of information here that seems to still point to a pretty sizable disconnect in, ensuring that our aging population can age in place in their own community, and our young people can become a part of whether the rental or homeowner market in their current community. I think this is very complicated work when you look at all these charts, but at the end of the day, we've stated that those are our goals, and we know that when I speak to people very anecdotally on the street, it's a concern across all ages and stages of life, and even all income brackets. And so we have our work cut out for us to keep plugging away at housing affordability and attainability across Anne Arundel County so that we can have more inclusive communities in every zip code. I find it stunning. The average age of first-time home buyers has increased to 38. 38. We need to keep working on this housing issue if we are going to keep home ownership and family wealth generation as part of the American dream. It's a concern. Thank y'all for your hard work.
Any other comments or questions? Thank y'all very much. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into this that we see the final product, and we appreciate all of you on the team for going through, and thank you in advance for the coming months as we work through this. So our next bill today is Bill number 1425, Archaeological Resources. Mr. Volke, this is your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief about this because I think there may be a significant amount of discussion, so I'll just leave it with that. The purpose of this bill is to take a look at a section of the code that deals with how we treat historic or archaeological resources when there is a development application that has been submitted. The intention with this bill is, from my perspective, and I recognize this perspective may not be shared by the administration, but from my perspective, to change this from what I see as a more subjective standard to a more objective standard. The way that the code reads, at least from my perception of it, is that it is largely focused on the Office of Planning and Zoning having a lot of discretion to decide what should be done in a development if there is some sort of historical or archaeological resource that is discovered on the site, and then there is a lot of discretion vested with Office of Planning and Zoning in directing how that needs to be addressed in this development application. So with that, the purpose with this bill is to create a more objective standard that removes some of that subjectivity from the Office of Planning and Zoning and allows applicants to have more certainty when they come into the office and submit these applications to know how their application will be treated. So with that, I look forward to the administration's feedback. And I want to thank them in advance for the meeting that we had yesterday where they did tee me up on a lot of their concerns. And so none of this is coming out of left field. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me, excuse me, at the table I have Christina Pompa, our Deputy Planning and Zoning Officer, and Darian Beverungen, the Acting Planning Administrator for Cultural Resources. Mr. Volke is correct. We do have some serious concerns with this bill. OPZ spent a good amount of time compiling some facts and information and historical background on zoning applications over the last 7 or 8 years to inform their position. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Beverungen.
Hello, thank you, everyone. As I said, my name is Darian Beverungen, and I am the acting administrator for the Cultural Resources section in the Office of Planning and Zoning. And I prepared some comments that I would like to share and be happy to answer questions at the end. There are thousands of archaeological sites in Anne Arundel County. The code, Article 17.6.502, that is currently in place, has protected these sites from destruction since it was first codified in 2005. As a process, it has been proven effective in the past 20 years with surprisingly few issues in its implementation. And no development project has been denied as a result of archaeology. The current code has been successful because it mirrors accepted federal and state standards for archaeological investigations and preservation, which are described in publications such as the National Park Service's Secretary of the Interior's Guidelines and the Maryland Historical Trust Standards and Guidelines for Archaeological Investigations in Maryland. There are 3 archaeological phases of evaluation. Phase 1, or the identification phase, locates and identifies the site, estimates its size and boundaries, and determines if further work is necessary to evaluate significance. Now, if a site is identified through a Phase 1 survey, then a Phase 2 survey may be conducted. And this is the evaluation phase, which determines the site's significance. It defines the site boundary and assesses its integrity. Once the site is determined to be significant, then you move to the treatment phase, or Phase 3. At this stage, the appropriate treatment measure is determined. Avoidance of the resource is always the goal, but if the resource cannot be avoided, and if any damage or disruption of the resource will result from implementation of the project, then a Phase 3 or data recovery is implemented. And data recovery efforts are rare and are undertaken to mitigate the impacts to archaeological resources by recovering significant data or information prior to disturbance or destruction, but they are a last resort. The proposed changes to Article 17.6.502 are not in keeping with the adopted General Development Plan, Plan 2040, which details the county's commitment to historic preservation as an important component of community preservation and enhancement of its built environment. Goal BE 14.1C discusses updating cultural resources code provisions to strengthen protective measures and reflect best preservation practices. In the case of archaeological sites, these important historical remnants are non-renewable. And disturbance, even professional excavation to a site results in the destruction and loss of the story that the site can tell. The current code, in keeping with federal and state guidance and the county's general development plan, supports best practice recommendations for preservation in place of significant archaeological sites and allows for professional assessment of local significance. Consistent with the standard of treatment for significant archaeological resources, current county code gives OPZ discretion to require significant archaeological resources to be preserved in place with the preservation easement. Only when there is no alternative to wholesale or even partial destruction of an archaeological site does the conversation turn to data recovery. In very limited cases, when a significant resource cannot be avoided, OPC has the discretion to allow a Phase 3 or data recovery effort. This is where archaeological resources and data collected from the site. They are collected from the site, however, the collection and the ultimate development project does destroy the site. Bill number 1425 would rewrite 176502B into a confusing run-on sentence and remove OPC discretion from the process, except that OPC would retain oversight to ensure that published standards and guidelines for archaeological investigations in Maryland is followed. The bill allows the developer complete control to decide what to do. One, they can either preserve the site with an easement by shifting the development envelope, or two, they can destroy the site and recover all data, including artifacts, and build directly on the formerly significant archaeological site. In the proposed bill, we find there is an assumption in place that the pursuit of a mitigation or data recovery step would be acceptable without a focus on methods to avoid a site or protect it in place. This is not the standard of treatment and removes OPC's discretion. It is concerning that this proposed bill may present loopholes or unintended consequences by introducing language such as development shall generally avoid disturbance, or that significance is based on the findings of the Phase 2 survey. For example, the insertion of the word generally is permissive, thus giving the applicant a choice as to whether the archaeological site should be avoided or not. It should be noted that OPC staff includes professional archaeologists who meet the Secretary of the Interior Standards professional qualification standards that review the submitted reports and evaluate whether they meet professional standards or if OPC is in concurrence with the recommendations for significance or if further survey is necessary. In many cases, consultants hired out of state are uninformed on the county's estimation of sites that are locally significant and produce recommendations that are based on National Register criteria only. Historic resources are carefully considered by OPZ's Cultural Resources section for their local value to county history. This was a conscious decision that was made in 2005 to ensure that locally important sites could be considered and protected, often those representing underserved historic communities and vernacular architecture and histories of the common man. These are sites regularly disregarded by the National Register. There is also a potential ethical concern here that the review for significance is put only in the hands of a consultant that is paid by the applicant, rather than opening it up for stakeholder review as in keeping with federal and state standards and the National Historic Preservation Act. In no other development review is the applicant the decision maker. When the code is proposed to change, we have to ask ourselves, what is the problem we are trying to fix? Over the past 9 years, we have had 209 development reviews flagged for archaeological survey, which is a very low percentage of our total development reviews. It is less than 8.5%. Generally, Phase 3 treatment has not been necessary since the majority of sites require no further work after the Phase 2 evaluation. The few that require treatment were dealt with easily through redesign and avoidance. Over the past 7 years, only 2 Phase 3 excavations were necessary. One was at the Sprague Farm Park in Arnold, where emergency salvage of artifacts was necessary because shoreline erosion was destroying the archaeological resource. And the second was for a subdivision called Fox Haven. And our office worked with the developer and planners to allow a small area, which was less than 10% of the significant archaeological site, for a partial phase 3, which was just on the fringes of the site to accommodate a safety design for a road for the cluster subdivision. So in closing, I would ask, why are we changing perfectly good county code language when no development project has ever been denied in the past due to significant archaeological resources? Why would we move away from Plan 2040, which discusses updating cultural resources code provisions to strengthen protective measures and reflect best preservation practices? And why would we allow applicants full discretion to destroy non-renewable archaeological resources without county oversight? Thank you.
No questions? Ms. Pickard.
I don't know that I have any questions at this moment, but this is a part of the code that in my 6 years we've not explored or touched or looked at. So it's a new area for some of us that are in our second term and then those of us that are in our first term. It is interesting, and we are hearing from constituents in different areas of the county that they are bumping up against some issues with where they are coming up with archaeological areas. Can we talk a little bit about, while I have you here this morning, and I won't harp on this, but when we talk about historic preservation and archaeological preservation, again, new to this area, best practices on private property where it's been determined that there is some sort of potentially archaeological resources in the ground. Can we talk about the best practice of leaving them in the ground and how that benefits, what the public benefit of that is, and how anybody would then know that they're there or learn from them?
Thank you for that question, Council Member. Yes, so, archaeology, it's important because it helps us, obviously, to understand the past and human culture, and can give us information about people or communities that, we can no longer see on the landscape with the built environment. So, preserving a site in place, there's a lot of information that we can gather from that. It's not just the artifacts, but the soil, we say the layers of stratigraphy that as you go down, throughout over the course of history, can tell us information. For example, you might see soil discoloration, whether it's a small round area or a larger round area, and oftentimes that can be an indication of where a post hole was, wooden post hole that had rotted or was burned, and oftentimes that's reflective of either a Native American construction or an early colonial period construction, and so that's, again, information that we can't see now, and a lot of Native American history wasn't documented, obviously, at that time. So we can learn through archaeology about those those peoples, the culture, and whatnot, and to preserve it in place too. Technology keeps advancing. Right now, in the field, they use ground penetrating radar, which they didn't have years ago. So, as technology progresses, the hope too is that you can recover more data without being so invasive, which is what a phase 3 would ultimately do. So it's an education. And usually also for phase 3, there has to be a research component. There has to be a reason for why you're choosing to destroy the site. Did that answer?
Sort of.
Okay.
I mean, so if I wanted to understand history and how the land in Anne Arundel County was used back until before we were maybe Anne Arundel County, where would I go to do that? If it's captured in the ground?
Well, and two, there's reports done. So after every, archaeological survey, reports are produced, so people can review those reports that are in the state, held at the Maryland Historical Trust. If they're in Anne Arundel County, we also have a copy of those reports as well. So any site that's already been surveyed, the reports usually provide a context of the history about that specific property, but also what was happening in the greater county and regionally. But all that data, once the survey is performed, is captured in those reports.
Okay, thank you.
You want to go? Oh,
Mr. Wilkie.
Miss Rodvian looked like she was ready, so I didn't want to take her thunder. Yeah. I just want to say I appreciate the concerns that have been expressed. I do. I'm a history nerd myself. Like, I was a history minor in college. I was a poli-sci major. I care immensely about history, so I recognize these concerns. I also think that there needs to be some counterbalancing to the way that I see this structure as it's worked historically in Anne Arundel County. I hear you when you cite the statistic of 209 instances, and in all but 2, we've been able to mitigate. I will play a little bit devil's advocate. I know I don't mean this to be adversarial, so I say that, and I want that to come across. But what I hear is, in 207 instances, Office of Planning and Zoning said, you're not going to be able to do this, and the applicant said, okay, this probably doesn't make sense for me to fight this, especially given the way the code is written, so I'm just going to go ahead and figure out how I comply with what Office of Planning and Zoning has said. I don't read that. When you say that, I don't hear that to go, oh, okay, everybody walked away happy in every one of these instances. I think sometimes applicants make decisions where they say, what's my cost benefit? Is it worth fighting them? No. Can I redesign the site? Yes. Is there any wiggle room that I have? Probably not. So given the way that the code is currently written, I think it does give a lot of discretion to planning and zoning. You all might be exercising that perfectly appropriately. I don't know. What I do know is it always is concerning for me when you give too much power to one side, if that makes sense. So to the extent that you all feel, you being Office of Planning and Zoning, the administration, that what this bill is proposing goes too far, as I've expressed to you, and I'll say it publicly, I'm certainly open to hearing if there are any feedback, suggestions, things that you think that we can do where we can hew to more of a middle course that allows both sides to feel like they are having some input in this process, as opposed to what I'm seeing as this sort of all or nothing proposition of keep it the way it is or do what we're suggesting. And I don't think that's ever the best solution. So with that, I'm certainly open to hearing whatever you all have in terms of suggestions, and I know you may not have those now, but I just want to state publicly I'm not opposed to amendments or to working this bill more if there are ways we think we can do it. So with that, I appreciate again your comments.
Mr. Volke, Christina Pompa with the Office of Planning and Zoning. I just want to say that we obviously have a difference of opinion in how the program is working. We would like more information from the council members on what they've heard, because I don't think we've had a chance to discuss those issues with you.
And I'll do a little devil's advocate as well from what Mr. Volke said. So we had 209 that went through, and 207 of them, some mitigation was found to be, that's normal with any zoning project that we have coming, right? That there's going to be some back and forth about when we go through any development plans and site plans as to where things will be situated. So it's not unique to historic preservation points that there would be some back and forth and mitigation that's done on any site plan and project, correct? Right. So it wouldn't be necessarily that it's odd that 207 of them were able to find a way. And I would say that, and my developer friends would probably agree with me on this, that rarely does everyone come away completely happy with what's going on, because these processes are some compromises and mitigation that's come through. So it wouldn't be unusual if some of them would say they were not at 100% happy with the end project, but it does appear that they did find a way to make their project work with some mitigation to preserve archaeological resources. I also want to say, I'm going to say this publicly because I've said it before, because I want to put it out there to the administration. We are one of the only counties in Anne Arundel County that does not have a Historic Preservation Advisory Commission. And we are one of the most historic counties in the entire country. So that's a little concerning when we have so many commissions tackling many, many things, but nothing for historic preservation. So my understanding is that we could qualify for greater grants and other possibilities if we had a Historic Preservation Advisory Commission. So this is something I have brought up with the administration, and I'm going to continue to push forward because this is a big gap, and it's included in Plan 2040. So this is something that we need to be moving forward. And perhaps if we had an Historic Advisory Commission, issues like this that are arising in this bill are something that the commission could weigh in on and provide advice to both council members and the county. Yes, ma'am.
Christina Pompa with the Office of Planning and Zoning. And if we had one of those, their first request might be that we have a historic preservation master plan, which is also in Plan 2040 and that we don't have.
Got it, Mr. Hunt?
Got it.
That's right. Well, and I agree with them. So this is something, as Ms. Pickard said, that we have not paid much attention to in the past and is an area that's neglected within our county and with our planning. But there is a large section on this in Plan 2040 that we have not yet made progress on some of the goals that were listed there, including doing a master plan and setting up an advisory commission. So those are things we need to move forward on. So. All right, there's no further questions. Thank you all very much. And next is Bill number 1525, an ordinance regarding measurement of signage area, which sounds very exciting. Ms. Pickard, this is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill 1525 has been crafted with the support of the administration. This is one of those cut the tape kind of situations in the code. It came to me with, it's a silly thing, a small franchise of gas stations in the county are in the process of renovating and improving their properties, and the canopy above fuel pumps that everyone knows, which is protect you from the rain, has a red stripe that circles the canopy, and it was because it was red and red is in the logo. It was being incorporated as part of the signage, which brought the sign outside of our allowable square feet of sign area. So they are being told to go get a variance, which they'll probably get because this happens all the time. OPZ will oppose it because the code incorporates architectural details and coloration and things like that as being part of a logo, which is then part of a sign. This is just something we just need to fix. I believe we're cool with the language to make sure that we're not sending small businesses to our administrative hearing officer for variances. This, to me, is a cleaning up of the code. Mr. Hunt?
Ethan Hunt for the administration. Kelly Kenny, supervising county attorney from the Office of Law. We are cool with the language. I appreciate you working with the Office of Planning and Zoning to clarify that language in this and make sure that background color is not included in this sign measurement. I
will say it sounds like a small thing, but it is. I mean, I'm happy to legislate is what we're here to do, but it was annoying to have to take time to change a few words in the code to bring common sense to how we apply the code in this county. It's annoying to me. I'm happy to do it. assuming I'm going to get a 7-0 vote on this bill, but we have work to do on the code to really cut the bureaucracy down for small businesses, large businesses, homeowners, and this is a small piece. I'm sure there's probably 2,000 other things we need to be doing. But happy to support small business in Anne Arundel County.
Mr. Hunt, anything else? Nope. Any comments, questions? All right. Is there any other business any council member would like to bring before the county council at this time? Mr. Volkey.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. The county council is adjourned until Tuesday, February 18th, 2025 at 7 p.m. for our next legislative session in these chambers. Thank you very much. Everybody be safe. Try to get home, get off the roads before the snow hits.